will start from ayah number 29, Surah An Nisa, inshallah. So once again, we will begin from ayah number 29 in Surah An Nisa. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما. O you who believe, do not eat your wealth amongst yourselves with falsehood, except if there is business between two parties amongst you who are pleased. That is to say that unless you're doing a business deal between each other that both of you are pleased with, pleased would mean that both of you have accepted the terms and conditions, etc. Inshallah, we'll explain all that as we go on. And do not kill yourselves, for indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very merciful with you to the nearest extent. So this ayah starts off with a commandment, what is called a negative commandment. That is, the command has to do with us not performing a certain action or leaving a certain action. So commandments are two types when it comes to the Quran and the commandments of Allah Azza wa Jal. Either the commandment is such that we are being told to do something, or the commandment is such that we are told not to do something or to leave it. I mean, you can translate it either way. Either you don't do it or you leave it. That is to say, abandon the act. So that's the type of commandment that is done here. And it is done in a general way, which doesn't have detailed commands or prohibitions. Rather, it just simply says, do not eat each other's wealth with falsehood. So that it's a general principle, if you will. And what it means is that we should not take each other's wealth by a means that is not approved of by the Sharia. And even in certain instances where we may not think that the Sharia is clear about transactions or the acquiring of wealth, then the general principle is also laid here in the rest of the ayah, إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ تِجَارَةً عَنْ تَرَاضٍ مِنْكُمْ, that if you're doing business with each other and both of the parties involved are pleased, that is, that they have accepted the terms of each other, because business is done. This is another part of the principle. Business is done as a transaction in which two parties involved agree with the terms set, and that they exchange goods or something worth, yani has value, if you will, something has value, and both of them are pleased. And tarabin, both of them, in other words, have accepted. They were not forced or coerced to accept the terms, but they have accepted those terms of their own free will, if you will. That's the principle, that if there's any type of means where people exchange wealth or gain wealth, and we'll get to that too, because there may be certain types of wealth that are given and the other person receiving has not necessarily exchanged anything in return. All right. And the interesting thing is that until those types of transactions were also explained to the Sahaba, to the companions of the Prophet, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, until those things were explained to them, some of the ulama and mufassirun, the exegetes of Quran, Ikrimah, Hasan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala, had said that when this ayah was first revealed, people were so diligent of not taking anything from anyone that they wouldn't even share a meal. That is to say that if someone offered a meal, they would not accept until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed other ayat in which he said that there is no harm if you eat together, jami'an aw ashtatan, that if you either eat your meals together, share your meals in other words, or if you eat by yourself, there's no harm in it. So that kind of clarified for them that eating a meal with others now is also okay. Why am I mentioning that? Why does anyone mention that in the tafsir of this ayah? Because their understanding of la ta'kulu amwalakum bainakum bil batil, that to eat somebody else's wealth, which here, of course, is kinaya. It is a metaphor for taking somebody's wealth. And wealth in general is anything that helps you live. PM, meaning anything that helps you survive and takes care of your necessities of life. Of course, food is included amongst that. Obviously, food, agriculture is a form, a means by where we get wealth. People do buy food and they trade food. It doesn't come for free. So that's included in it. Food is our food in itself is something that we have value for, that we pay for or we trade for. And to give it, right, to somebody, that's the way they understood this ayah. So literally, that to get it or receive it in this case from somebody without having exchanged anything in return, that you didn't do anything for that. That is somebody's wealth and they gave it to you and you didn't do anything in return. You didn't pay them for that meal, if you will. I'm gonna put it in our terms. So they took it so seriously that even that for a while, some people had stopped doing until it was clarified to them that when you're invited or someone shares a meal with you, there's no problem in that. Then you can do that. You can share your meals. In fact, sharing meals and feeding people, of course, is one of the greatest things you can do in Islam. But this was for the believer themselves, that they wanted to keep themselves out of position for a while when this ayah was first revealed, of taking food from somebody without giving them something in return. I hope I made that clear. That's how serious they took this ayah. So they understood from this ayah, and which is the point I was trying to make, that taking wealth, which is what this is about, taking somebody's wealth or anything that has value without giving anything in exchange, because this is tijara, this is the exception, illa an takuna tijara, unless there is some kind of lawful exchange, or you can say in this case, an taradim minkum, that there is a agreed, then both parties are happy with the agreement of what they are exchanging, that you're giving me this for that, whether it is currency like we use most of the time here in most of our exchanges and business deals and so forth and so on, or whether it's bartering, meaning using actually items of wealth, that for this item, I exchange it for this item that you have, right? So if it's not that, that if the outward meaning of the ayah, the very literal meaning of the ayah, is that if there's not some kind of fair exchange, if you will, not to use that term because that has its own connotations in our modern day economy, the liberal global market, right? Fair exchange, as you might see in some places, this is fair exchange. I don't mean anything like, I don't want to try and give you that impression. Fair exchange, meaning two people, and taradin minkum, they're happy and pleased with the deal they're making. Again, that means that there's no coercion or someone doesn't really feel good about it. They have something there that they feel like they're not really getting the best bargain. That's excluded. Now, the details of that, of course, are included in the books of fiqh when talking about business and business transactions. That's not the purpose and the place of this halaqah, or excuse me, the purpose of halaqah today. We're not going to go over every single detail because it gets quite lengthy. But we do set a principle here that basically, if you have not given something of your own wealth or value in exchange for somebody else's wealth or something that they have of value, and if it is not something that you have received, if that's not the case, yani you have not exchanged something, what it's called tijara, right? That there is not an exchange there. But if you have received something from someone and that wealth was not received either through a commandment of Allah, and that's its connection with the other ayat that came before. Because in the other ayat that preceded in Surah An Nisa, you see that we're talking about things like mahar, like dowries, al-muhur. You're also talking about things like inheritance laws, right? So those things, those are instances where you are receiving money, okay, not necessarily in exchange for something. However, I have to clarify, and please forgive me, I won't go into detail on the definition here, but technically in a mahar, this is, again, we don't want to take like very profound human connections and make them into just base things, but there is an aspect of marriage that, quite frankly, from a strictly speaking law perspective, and this is all related because we just talked about marriage, it is a business contract. In other words, two people make a contract with each other that they're going to live together and give each other exclusive rights of intimacy. That's the literal definition of marriage in Sharia, okay? And even technically speaking, in English common law here, for instance, if a couple were living outside of marriage, it means they don't have a contract that makes that intimacy lawful. And although nobody gets arrested for adultery nowadays, right? But that technically still is in the law books, because basically adultery means the same thing as, really in Islam, zina means that you have that intimacy without any rights attached. So you don't have any commitment at all towards that person. So you're getting the same benefit, but there's no commitment. Zawaj, and I want you to keep this clear in your minds in Islam, is a contract from that perspective, legally speaking, between two people that grants them the rights of intimacy. And in that, the men are expected to pay in that contract al-mahr, the dowry. And this dowry, first of all, has to be understood. Faridah, it is an obligation from Allah. So it has really, in that perspective, nothing to do with the women themselves, okay? Because technically from Sharia also, as we've seen, the woman can actually give back that dowry if she so wills. So this is an obligation from Allah that he has obliged husbands, in this case, in a commandment of his, to give to the brides, the women they marry, their mahr. She can do whatever she wants with it afterwards, even returning it. We've seen that earlier in Surah An Nisa. But the right does not come, so then it's not necessarily because of them per se, it is because of the commandment of Allah. That is to say that even though it is a contract, right? And in that contract, there are certain rights that the husband has also, just like the woman has as well. So when you make a contract in a business, okay, those rights are established. Everyone knows what their duty is as a business partner. And if some of those rights are violated, then the partners involved have the right or have the option to go to someone who enforces law and say that my rights are not being fulfilled. Then can you please do something about this, either by rectifying it, making the person fulfill those rights, or by annulling that contract, which is called nasakh, or fasakh, I'm sorry, excuse me, fasakh, that they can annul the contract. Inshallah, maybe that's a little dry, but it's important to know those things. These are the things that we should understand. This is Sharia, okay? And so basically, it means that in that, the women have received money and wealth from somebody, which at that time, although technically there is, and again, not to be crude, there is an exchange here. The exchange is for this money and this contract, I have now exclusive rights to intimacy, technically speaking, all right? But still, there's not actually, if you will, there's no exchange that she has to give something physical in return besides that, like the rights to intimacy. This is one way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given someone wealth, right? And is obliged one party to give a certain amount of wealth. And then with that wealth, there are rights established between each other, no doubt. Okay, I hope that makes it clear. So it's not like necessarily giving one item for another. Although again, maybe we'll talk about, let's put another issue, because I don't want to upset you, and we can talk about that at another time, another place, to clarify what I mean without sounding too crude, because obviously there is the rights of intimacy, which is established through that contract. In other things like inheritance, there you have a clear example of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given wealth to certain people without an exchange. That is to say that the inheritors, whether they are wives or children or other relatives from either your father's or mother's side, from above you, which means even your grandparents, and these are all the laws of inheritance, or below you, near relatives like uncles, and those would be considered actually above you, meaning they're included to be like your father in that sense. There's what is above you in inheritance and below you. These are all the laws of inheritance, which, by the way, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam predicted that this is one of the things, the first things that would be removed in this ummah in terms of their knowledge, that they will forget the laws of inheritance. So that's another important subject, which again, we can't do now because it takes a long time. But in general, those laws of inheritance, okay, that is wealth that a person here, in this case, you're not giving the deceased anything in return. So this is wealth that you have received without making an exchange, tijara or a barter, however way you want to word it. Okay. So there are times and places where the Sharia allows, and that's where the explanation had to come, that the Sharia does allow at certain times and in certain conditions that a person can receive wealth without having necessarily done anything in exchange. Zakah also, right? The person doesn't necessarily, when they receive zakah, this is a right that is actually given from Allah Himself. So this is the right of the poor, lil fuqara, from Allah Himself. So the obligation is actually a farida and a commandment from Allah Himself on the behalf of those who are poor and destitute and other categories which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned, right? That those people who cannot for some reason temporarily earn because of travel and other reasons, their right is exclusively to zakat. So here again, Allah has obliged certain people to pay zakat. Those people receive that money or that wealth, and they don't have to give anything in exchange for it. There are obviously sadaqah. There's sadaqat, and there are the khayrat and tabarru. There's charity that one can give on one's own will, where the other party does not have to, again, exchange anything in return. And also there's hiba. There's when things, there's certain laws concerning that as well, that when in giving gifts and receiving gifts, right, there are also commandments involved. And there also is an example of how someone can acquire wealth without having to give anything in return. But the general principle is this: barring those exceptions from the Sharia, whenever wealth is acquired, wealth should be acquired by a fair exchange or barter between two people who have done it out of their own free will. And taradin minkum. Taradin comes from rida, to be happy, is how some people have translated it, right? Radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Like when we say radiyallahu anhum wa radu an, the ayah, not we say, but the ayah says, Allah is pleased with them. But what it means, ar-rida, to be pleased with something, also means to have accepted something wholeheartedly, like the dua we were taught by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, raditu billahi rabba wa bil islami dina wa bi muhammadin nabiyya rasula, that we are happy, that is, that we have accepted wholeheartedly that Allah is our Rabb, Islam is our deen, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is our prophet. You see, they're all related. So this word too in this ayah, an taradin minkum, is all related to that same root, al-rida. So it means, again, that when you are making that exchange or barter or doing that business deal, that both parties have accepted the terms willingly. That's why we said no coercion and other things that are the opposite of being a willing participant in that deal. Okay, if there's any aspect of that, either a person has not exchanged something, like they stole it, right, which is called ghusb. It's interesting too to note that a lot of the criticism that we see of certain laws of the Sharia, the hudud, especially the penalties of Sharia, right, when we talk about cutting the hand of people who steal, right, so that we use the word in English, steal, but as-sariq, yani the wording in the Quran, as-sariq was-sariqa, the person who is sariq does an act of sariqa. It's actually, in a very technical way, different from just the general term in English, stealing. So al-ghusb means to steal something by force. That is, that you have something and I just forcefully take it from you. Even if that just means I just grab it from you and you don't do anything in return, right? Or I steal something in front of you and you don't do anything to take it back. That's important because, not to talk about pop culture, but, I don't know if you remember Aladdin, the whole, Disney cartoon that came out, and they had a scene where he stole something from the man's store and ran away, and then they were going to cut his hand off, right? That's not Sharia. Okay, what he did in that scene is technically called a ghusb. Okay, this is the illegally taking something from someone, because again, here, what is a technical term? You took it from them, you didn't give them anything in return. Because the idea too in this ayah, as many have said, that the Sharia protects anything. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. The interesting thing, how is this connected? Don't kill yourselves. To these ayat that refer to not taking each other's wealth unjustly. because basically wealth is part of those things that protect human beings. That is to say, it's qiyam, it is those necessities of life, that if without wealth, human beings won't live. That's why far from, when we talk about abstention from dunya, what we mean is not valuing the things of this world, not that you shouldn't have wealth, because without wealth, your life is, you won't be able to protect your life. You will perish, because wealth is a necessary means of survival. In the same way that zina and marriage was mentioned before this, because without protection of rights of people in intimacy, then obviously children will become lost and nasl and lineage will become lost. And that's also what will damage and hurt human survival. Okay, that's the connection between all of this. So in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Imam, I'm sorry, I missed that. Why, when that Aladdin stole something, why is that not punishable by cutting off your hand?
Okay, I'll get to that just now. I'm sorry, I kind of veered off. But I just wanted to make the point that when Allah ends the ayah, Inna Allaha kana bikum rahima, that Allah is merciful to you. In other words, that these are things, these directly, this part of Allah saying that He is Rahim, this attribute of mercy, is also in regards to our worldly affairs and our survival in this world. You got it? You see what I'm saying? The mercy of Allah and the rahmah of Allah is not just in the akhirah, it's also in terms of the survival of human beings, and whatever keeps them safe and enables them to live healthily is also considered in the Sharia. This is part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also wants for us, right? That He wants for us ease and facilitates for us ease. And He also wants for us that we la taqtulu anfusakum, do not kill yourselves. So don't do things in terms of your wealth even that will eventually lead to your destruction, that will make it very hard for human beings to survive. So that's another aspect of Sharia, that business is encouraged, wealth is encouraged. Having no attachment to the dunya is good if a person has a certain spiritual level. That's a different issue. But in general, wealth is needed so that everyone can survive. And that is encouraged, and that is meant. One of the intentions of the Sharia is to protect, the maqasid of the Sharia is to protect people's wealth. Okay. Now, as far as what I was mentioning earlier, that why in that scene did that not necessitate, for instance, that Alauddin should have his hand cut off? Because this is the words exactly in Arabic, which is why when we translate it into English, it becomes difficult to understand really what the Sharia is saying. That ghusb is when like I said, you steal something, but you take it, right, from somebody. The difference between that and sariqa. Sariqa is the technical word, as-sariqa was-sariqa. This is the technical word used by Allah Azza wa Jal for a person that when they do this particular act, which is called sariqa, then their hand should be cut off. What is it in a very technical term, or excuse me, in its very technical terminology? It is the taking of wealth that has two aspects. Number one, that it is hidden and it is protected. Okay, that's the important part to remember, that when someone steals something that has these two aspects, that it is hidden and it is protected. Now, an example like that, like when Alauddin stole some food from, right, that's not hidden. That's not the definition of hidden. That is, that person, meaning the person who's selling that food, that is his wealth. He has it on display. It's not hidden. It's not stored away somewhere where no one can see it. All right, that's not the definition of hidden. Number two, it's not protected, meaning he doesn't have, in that case, it's in the open market. There's no case over it, or there's nothing, it's not in a safe or something that's protecting it. So if someone steals that wealth, it's not technically sariqa. It's called ghusb. The interesting thing about ghusb too is that in Sharia, if you take something from somebody that way, it's a sin and it is punishable, but not by cutting off the hand. And the other thing that's interesting thing about it is that until the time that you are required, like in Sharia, if you take something from somebody in that way, you are required to return it exactly as you took it, that is without damage. Like if I stole from you, for instance, whatever, like I took your lunch money. I know that's a bad example, but whatever. I took your lunch money. I have to give exactly how much I took back to you. And if anything is gone, then I have to also replace it, like 25 cents or something. I know it's a bad example, right? But Interesting thing is, until the time that I return that wealth, the Sharia actually acknowledges that that wealth is yours now, even if you took it unjustly. So you can actually use it. But then if you use it, you have to pay it back. One of our interesting story regarding that technical nuance there is that some of the ulama in my own lineage of knowledge, in the Indian subcontinent, when the British had just started to colonize it and they had rejected this, the rule of the British rule over India, they took them to court. The British took them to court and they said, "Are you starting sedition?" That was the charge, because then they could, kill them or execute them. And they said, "No, we're simply saying this technical term, ghusb, that you have taken unjustly the land of India, but while you have taken it by force unjustly, your rule is we acknowledge your rule, but you have to give that land back and pay for any damages in exchange." Do you understand my point? So we're not seditious. We're not rebelling against you. We're saying, yeah, you do rule over India right now, but it's unjust that you took it from India without any fair exchange. So you have to give it back and you have to pay for any damages that you have done during that time. You get my point? Anyhow, khair. So that's ghusb. What he did was technically ghusb. He took something from somebody. It didn't have those two aspects. It's not hidden and it's not protected. So basically, hidden and protected would mean, another very simple but maybe bad example. Let's say you have a safe somewhere in your home where you have $1 million stored away. Just an example. It's hidden. You have not disclosed its whereabouts to people, right? And it's protected. It's in a safe. If someone breaks into your home and steals that money, that's sariqa. That's the type of, if you will, stealing or thievery, if that's a word, that requires a person to get their hand cut off. Do you get it now?
Yeah. What about a pickpocket?
Yeah. See, there's right. I have to look that up again because I don't remember coming across that. But that would be also, in a very technical way too. It's considered to be hidden and protected. Although there could be someone that's why I'll check. There could be someone who may argue with that. Well, pockets, people know that there's money in it. I don't know. I'll check. But even in that case, if we consider it something that is wealth that is protected and it's hidden, right, that it still has to be of a certain amount as well before the hand could be cut off. But pickpocketing, wallahu alam, is under the same kind of, right, because you're not taking something from someone where they see you taking it, or they know you're taking it, or they want, not that they want to, but they haven't really protected that wealth or hidden it. I mean, if someone goes to the extent that they're putting it in a pocket, the pocket is there to protect it and keep it from the eyes of other people. Allahu alam. See the very technical nuance there, right?
Right.
But the definition is exactly that. Wealth that is both hidden and protected is what is called sariqa. So if someone takes wealth from that falls under those two categories, then that is what requires taking of the hand, right? Otherwise, simply just taking something is called ghusb, right? Especially if it's by force, right? And in that case, there's not actually the removal of the hand. In that case, the person simply has to return the wealth exactly as they took it.
I'm just trying to think that through, like what are you trying to prevent, right? Like, so if someone's riding their bike and you push the guy off the bike and you take his bike, that would not, you're not stealing anything that's hidden. And
Right.
I'm trying to wonder what's the punishment. I'm just trying to think in my head is to prevent people from stealing.
Well, there's another aspect. Okay. One thing is that if you are actually threatening somebody's life, or you have actually harmed someone in such a way that you wanted to either kill them or you didn't kill them and you called grievous bodily harm, as they call it here, right? Then the punishment is much more severe. Then you're considered qata' tariq, which, is called a highway robber, I guess it's the best way of translating it. And the punishment there is so severe that those people are actually killed by the state, in Islamically speaking, right?
That would be
And
like an assault, I guess, kind of thing.
right. And also, even from another perspective, you're not even supposed to pray Salatul Janazah for such people, right? So it is very serious when you're doing it violently, like if you're using, like, at the threat of death, right? You're. But if you just the example you gave, like some bully just takes somebody's bike, it's different, because also the Sharia encourages, like the Prophet said in the Hadith of Abu Dawood and others, that if someone tries to take your wealth, you're supposed to defend yourself. Right. And if you die, if the other person gets the upper hand, you become shaheed. Right. So you're not supposed to give anyone wealth like that. You should, again, the Sharia actually puts value on these things. So a person should defend their wealth.
Yeah, it's, I know we're a little off topic, but that's such a hot, when especially these people talk about cruel punishment in Islam, it is interesting that is such a misnomer, that shoplifting, right, is what everyone uses. A shoplifter should get his hand. Well, what you're telling us is no, that is not. I mean, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's not the case. And the reason why sadiqah, when you steal wealth that is, for instance, has the stipulation there, those two qualities, that it's both hidden and protected. The reason why the punishment is so severe in this case is because there's an added element to just the guy stealing a candy bar from a shop or taking some kid's bike. There's another element in it, which is khiyana. There's treachery involved.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And anytime you live in a society where everyone is treacherous, again, what is the point? If you look at all of the spirit of all these commandments, what we just mentioned before, anything that will make human survival and society like less, how would you say, like it's a lot harder to survive in such a society, the Sharia prohibits. See what I'm saying? Yeah. You can't live. Even Kant, the great philosopher, quote unquote, in Western tradition, said that's the reason why lying is always immoral, because no matter what way you look at it, whether it's religious or not, no human society can survive if everyone's a liar. You understand? Like you can't have human survival without truthfulness and honesty. And that's really what the Sharia is doing here as well, is that when there's khiyana, when there's treachery, that's again going back to the original topic that came before this, ziwaj and zina. The reason why zina is so harsh and harshly prohibited in Sharia is because there's an aspect of treachery there.
Yeah.
Even in the worst case scenario, if a person actually has an illicit relationship and has children, and now bijara, the real husband has to take care of a child that's not even his own. You see what I'm saying? So there's an aspect of khiyana and treachery there, right? And anytime you have a society where people's relationships are based on treachery, khiyana, and dishonesty, that society will never survive. Okay. And the same goes for rishwa, right? Bribery and all of these other things obviously are included in this. That anytime you have a society where people take from each other in ways that are not lawful, which means that there's not a fair exchange between two people whom they are both have accepted and are pleased with the terms, right? Then you have treachery, which is the worst case, rishwa, bribery. It's the same type of situation. This is a society that cannot survive, which is very sad to say, because in most Muslim countries, bribery is like it's the trend, right? We see so much of it, unfortunately. And that, even from that perspective, economically, right, you're not going to survive as a nation when you don't have some type of law or laws that protect people from these types of interactions and dishonesty. That nation will never survive like that. And it is so sad to say that Muslim countries are steeped in these types of things when we have a very clear Sharia that, as you see, does not allow us to take things from people to such an extent that when they first heard this ayah, like I said, some of the Sahaba didn't even want to accept a meal from somebody, let alone take a bribe or be dishonest, right, in their business transactions. They didn't even want to take a meal from someone until they were allowed to, because they felt that if I'm taking this person's wealth, because that still is wealth in some form, you can sell a meal after all, restaurants, right? You're taking their wealth and you haven't done anything in return. What did you give them in return? So it's unjust. That's how literal they took it, until they were given permission that yes, giving meals and sharing meals is a good thing. And there's no problem if you eat together and share your meals. You got what I'm saying? Take the contrast between the two peoples.
So, Imam,
Huh.
sorry to interrupt. I have one question. So what about these white white collar crimes, like, you know, people robbing off people of the retirement funds, like millions of dollars?
Right.
Is this like coming to ghusb, or is like that is like sarika, like you were saying that the thieves that should be cut off, the hand
Yeah,
should be not cut off?
that's an excellent question. So before I answer that, I'm going to have to go back and do a little bit more research and think about it, because I don't want to answer just, you know, at the, you know, right now, and then not really have given a really thoroughly thought out answer. But we know from what we've learned so far that no doubt when people have these white collar crimes have an aspect of khiyana, right? Just like sariqa.
Yes.
Is it true or
Yep.
not? And even worse to a degree, because you're taking advantage of people that, you know, they put their trust in you. Okay, so it's even worse. You know,
Yes.
in that respect, it's almost the same as sadiqah, because again, if I had $1 million saved up somewhere in a safe and nobody knows about it, then the only way the person who stole it would know about it is if it's someone I trusted.
Yes.
You see, like I told them that, yeah, you know, brother, mashallah, I have $1 million saved in my safe at home. Nobody knows about it, and then it's gone. Obviously, you know that someone betrayed that trust, right? That's why it's so serious. So my initial answer, just on instinct, based on that type of qiyas and deduction, would be that yeah, it would be something like that, sariqa. But just let me check, because you never know. There's nuances to things that I would like to double check, right? But you
Sure.
know,
Sure.
there's
Imam.
no
Yeah.
doubt that we know those two things, that the aspect of khiyana and betrayal of trust is definitely there in these quote unquote white collar crimes. And to some extent, they're even worse because, you know, again, you're taking people's literal. The only thing that might make it complicated is that when somebody gives their wealth in some type of exchange, as the ayah says, "An taradin minkum," like in some type of contract where that person willingly gives up that wealth, even here in English common law, it becomes more convoluted, right? Because you gave it. Do you understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. It's like more like people trust them to like manage their wealth. I mean, they're like retirement funds and things like that. But then
Right.
the other party, they end up abusing it, and they like totally, you know, steal it from them.
Right.
So that is
So
like one aspect. And as compared to like just the shoplifting, which is just maybe $2 worth of goods, right?
right.
Worth $1 million.
But again, here's the thing: is that the problem is again that you know, when you have an exchange and taradin minkum, you see what I'm saying? That if they agreed to give that wealth and later on the person misappropriated it or used it, right, they still have to be held responsible, no doubt. But is it the same thing as sadiqah? Allah knows best, because the problem is you gave that wealth on your own will. And taradin minkum. Even here, like I said, that's where things get complicated in English common law, because if it's something that the other lawyer can prove that you gave it on your own will, right? You know, you signed the contract, then it becomes difficult. You see what I'm saying? That's
Yes,
probably
I think it comes to the intentions. I mean, sometimes people do lose. I mean, they like do lose money in the business transactions. That is
right.
okay. But if somebody is running a Ponzi scheme to begin with, just to rob people, his or
Right.
her intention was not even right from the beginning.
Right. So they do have a responsibility and they will be punished, but it's not necessarily the same thing as sadiqah from that perspective.
Okay.
You understand? Because you did agree at some point to give that wealth to that person.
Okay.
And that's probably why we should go back to Surah An Nisa in those ayat where we were told that we should not give wealth to people who don't really have expertise, right? You understand? So there also should be times and places where, even when, although that's not technically part of the ayah, al-hajr, yani when we like, so if you remember in the beginning of Surah An Nisa, not giving wealth to people who are younger, all the way up into the age of 25, according to Imam Abu Hanifa. In other words, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, immature people can remain immature up until 25. After the age of 25, then you kind of have to give them whatever responsibilities and wealth that they have owed to them. You understand my point? But
Yes.
a person can be completely yani bekam, right? Like they have no idea, bekar, right? Like they have no idea whatsoever of how to handle wealth or do things like that. They can be in that state until the age of 25. Now, although it's not technically mentioned in the ayah, and again, this is something that, mashallah, it's opening up the opportunity for me to go back and hit some books again too. It's been a long time since I actually did some research in regards to business transaction itself in Sharia. But then the idea, what I'm trying to say is that when people get older, also, unfortunately, what happens is they become a little less competent as well, right?
Yes, mom. Yep.
You understand? So it's very easy for someone to take advantage of such people. So in that case, it would be good for the family to also be involved when they want to spend their money, even if it is theirs. You understand what I'm trying to say, right? That there should be some kind of, you may not control their money, but at least some advice. Like if your parents get older, or someone you know in your family gets older and has a lot of money, and then people are trying to take advantage of them, it's not a bad thing to get involved in some way and try to prevent such things from happening, because this is what happens to a lot of people, especially retirees, when they don't have
Yes.
family, right? They
Yep.
don't have family to protect them, and they're in a retirement home and they have all this money, and then someone comes along, Bajara, and they take advantage of them, right?
Yeah.
Or there's a lot of scenarios where there was something that happened in Chicago. Maybe some of you may or may not have heard it. There was a big scheme there too that happened to a lot of Muslims. It was in the Muslim community, maybe 10 or maybe even more now, like, a long time, maybe 10, more than 10 years ago. But unfortunate thing that happened in this scheme is someone actually ran off with people millions of dollars, and even sometimes they took somebody's complete retirement fund, all these, like, it was bad. So there has to be some means, right, where obviously we can protect ourselves from schemes like that. In the Sharia, obviously there's a punishment for people who do that, even if it's not sariqah, technically speaking, but there still is a punishment at the very least. And again, I'm going to do some more research now that you brought this up, because I can't remember all the answers right now. But at the very least, they definitely are responsible for returning that money, if not, more than that, at the very least.
Yes,
So,
sounds good. Sounds good, Imam. Thank you.
but definitely though, again, there has to be prevention measures as well, because you see all of these commandments, there's two things. There's a prevention measure, like this is the maqasid of the Sharia. We prevent. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, la taqrabu zina. Don't even get close to zina, because these are prevention measures, right? So you have to also use prevention measures. This is called saddul dhara'i. Saddul dhara'i means that anything that could potentially lead to haram can at times become haram itself. You understand the principle, right? Anything that could
Yes, Imam. Yep.
right? Anything that can lead to haram can potentially become haram itself. So obviously, you have to have some prevention measures there when thinking about these things that will cut off the capability of anyone taking advantage of people and taking their wealth unjustly, because this is the commandment. لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل. Don't take each other's wealth, which is another way of translating it, by the way, just a subtle point to this ayah, that another way of translating it is don't take each other's wealth unjustly. The reason why that's subtle is because it's like saying our wealth is shared. That the ideal idea in society is not that you can't have your own wealth and property, but basically by protecting each individual's wealth and property, the idea is that it becomes all of our wealth, because we all exchange each other's wealth and benefit from each other. Does that make sense? So I don't want to,
Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to put out like a Marxist socialist type of vibe out there. That's not what's meant, right? Not that, you know, what's yours is mine. No, but more, what's that?
No, sorry, ma'am. I had to put myself on mute.
Oh, okay. So it's not that we're not trying to say like, you know, that the state owns everything and it's given, you know, no. Every individual has the right to their own wealth and property in Islam. I'm not talking about capitalism or Marxism or any of this, right? But the idea is that by all of us having our own wealth and our own property and all of these things, that we are now using that to exchange our wealth with each other. So it becomes like a large resource pool where everyone is benefiting. You got it? And that's why
Yes.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what after that, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Some may translate the ayah to mean something like suicide, but some have translated, meaning some of the ulama have actually gone to say that this is in relation to all of these things. That is to say, all these commandments that we mentioned before, whether it's zawaj or the protection of inheritance or protection of wealth in general, is in order that you don't, as a people, as a society, literally kill yourselves. That is to say that you don't protect these things, people's wealth and people's honor, people's lineage, in the case of zawaj, then in effect, what you're doing is you are making a society where people are literally making themselves life so difficult that it's literally like killing them or taking their lives, to the point that even human survival will become untenable. It's not possible. And Allah, in Allah kana bikum rahima, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very merciful to you, meaning that He does not will that in this life as well, as a people, as a society, that you should perish, but rather that your wealth and your lives should be protected, right? And that you should also formulate law and such an interaction with each other that your wealth is protected, and that by that you benefit from each other and your wealth. You understand? So actually, I didn't realize how much time we spent, mashallah. So, there's a lot of things to say, obviously. Even in that subject itself, the idea of, you know, in Islam, what are the laws? We can cover, I can maybe go into more detail about the questions you asked, inshallah, next time we meet. But if you have any questions so far about what we just did, then inshallah, please, we can start now. Jazakumullah khairan kathir.
Inshallah. Thank you, brother. If anybody has any questions. I don't see anything in the chat also.
And by the way, just to leave on this note, I've said this many times when we've met, but this is also why earning wealth in Islam actually has commandments as well. So anyone who is responsible for anyone else, in brief, then the earning of wealth becomes actually a faridah. There's actually a hadith that is mentioned in this line as well. Kasbul halali faridah ba'd al-faridah. That the earning of halal wealth is an obligation after other obligations. Other obligations means to say that not at the expense of making salah, for instance. So you can't make the excuse, as many people do, that I have to earn so I can't pray. That's what's meant by the end of that hadith, wallahu a'lam. But the idea is, again, that whenever we are responsible for somebody else, then earning of wealth becomes an obligation. So definitely in Islam, we encourage it, right? Not having attachment to dunya means that either of a personal choice, you live a simpler life, excuse me, or even if you don't live a simple life, every Muslim is obliged internally, because as there are outward commandments, there are internal commandments, that in the heart, you cannot have attachment to worldly material things. But you must earn wealth, because the obligation of earning wealth is for what? The benefit of yourself and others. It is protecting your life and protecting the life of the people you are responsible for. And actually, if you want to be more generous, meaning like an Abu Bakr, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, then you earn enough wealth, as he did, because he was a wealthy man, to be able to benefit everybody in society. Does it make sense? Right? So if that's your intention, this is something Islam encourages. So we need wealth, and we should have, in certain cases, I want to reiterate that point, in certain cases, earning wealth is an obligation, a farida. Okay? How much more emphasis must there be that this is an obligation? So no doubt we encourage a strong economy and strong Muslims in terms of earning wealth. We don't encourage, however, internally in the heart, right? Kun fi dunya ka'annaka gharib wa 'abir as-sabil, that in your heart you cannot have attachment to material things, but outwardly every Muslim should have a certain amount of wealth, at the very least enough to keep themselves alive and to survive. And also there must be people in society who have enough to be able to take care of others as well, and keep the society strong, keep the economy strong, so forth and so on. Okay, does it make sense? Inshallah.
Yes, brother, inshallah.
Okay, so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept us and give us ample wealth and put barakah in it, and make us generous people, and make us people who prosper and can, through that prosperity, be strong as a community and as a society and across the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do so out of his rahmah. Amen.
Inshallah, Ameen, brother. Thank you, brother. Inshallah, we will meet next week, and we will inshallah post the recording also in the channel.
All right,
Thank you,
inshallah.
brother, so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Gonna end the meeting now.